I don't think the question is no longer, can we track this data? Instead, now the question has become, okay, what can we track? Where can we track it? And under what legal entity are we tracking it for? Like, you really just have to be, we have to be intentional in what we're tracking and why we're tracking it and how we're using that data. Hey there, welcome to the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. I am Jennifer.
And I'm Corey.
And today we're going to talk about an issue that we are paying particular focus to in 2026, and that is privacy, not just HIPAA, but also just privacy in general across the interwebs, because there are literally, there's a new cottage industry that we've seen pop up over the last year or so. There's 20 different states with 20 different privacy policies. We have some of the online privacy policies that are have been put in place across Europe and in California and whatnot. And I think no matter where you are geographically as a practice, you are about to have to deal with this firsthand. We're paying attention to it, and we think it's something you should be paying attention to as well. So Corey, why don't you frame what we're actually, like, what it is that we're going to talk about here? Yeah,
well, for so long, when it comes to tracking and just kind of marketing in general, everyone is afraid of HIPAA and having a HIPAA violation. What we're talking about is how this is no longer just HIPAA, and it's actually just sort of privacy in general on the web. And interestingly enough, it's not just healthcare, it's across all industries. So yes, healthcare marketing risk is still driven in part by HIPAA, as well as the Office of Civil Rights Guidance, so OCR, and then FTC enforcement. But then there's these state consumer health data laws. And what we're seeing is there's an increase in privacy lawsuits or HIPAA-related lawsuits. And a lot of practices are not HIPAA compliant by the book or by the guidance.
Or not compliant at all by the book.
Or not. Correct, or not compliant at all. And so we think that this is something worth talking about and worth paying attention to, because this whole idea of, pixels, tracking, marketing, it now kind of sits at this intersection, which is still kind of a gray area of compliance and trust and marketing performance, and how can you get the numbers that you need without sharing any sort of PHI, essentially.
Yeah, and I will say this too. Like, let's start with this. One is, this is going to be a two-part episode. Today we're going to talk about the big picture of what's happening, and then next episode that will drop is going to talk about specifically what you can do, including like a checklist. And the checklist is something that you should absolutely run by your attorney, because the fact is this stuff is changing so fast that you have to stay on top of it. We're on top of it. We're trying to keep up with all the things that are changing, and the fact that there's 20 different regulatory environments related to based on the state that you're in, that's always a challenge. So certainly, like, go to your people and make sure you've got this right. But there's some basics things that we can be doing. What this reminds me of is a handful of years ago when ADA compliance was like the thing we were kind of worried about across the board, because, just like you have to have, your ADA compliance at your physical practice, you also need to be paying attention to your website from an ADA compliance standpoint. And, like, all the time you would see these companies getting sued or websites, companies getting sued because their website wasn't in ADA compliance. And these entire cottage industries were popping up. And yeah, your website should be ADA compliant so everybody has access to it, just like your physical location should be. That wasn't the problem. The thing that was happening is all of these lawsuits, in a good way, as long as you weren't part of a lawsuit, but in a good way, they were elevating the conversation. That's what's potentially happening right here. There are, entire departments within some of the big law firms focused on privacy policy. And there are class action lawsuits that are not really benefiting the patient or the consumer per se, but they are elevating the conversation to a level that it is too hard to ignore at this point. And that is kind of like where we are in this moment. It's this convergence of, the lawyers have a new industry. This is like another version of I don't mean this to be negative, but like another version of an ambulance chaser. This is a new industry that there's an opportunity to build a business around. There are new vendors that are out here saying that they can fix this problem for you. But they can also sell you some other stuff, but this is new things. And there are also just some fundamental things that we can all start paying attention to that will, hopefully get us to keep us in compliance while they are working this out at a national level. But because of this and this kind of convergence, we're all going to get roped into it. And, let's look at it from a positive, just like the ADA compliance issue, is we are elevating the level of conversation. We're going to start having a new conversation around marketing and privacy, and we've got to get our ducks in a row. That is what this episode's about.
Yeah, and again, these things that they're not theoretical. There's lawsuits and settlements happening right now. And I mean, just let's see, 3 days ago, we were onboarding a new client, and I was looking at their website, and they're they're going to offer some like in-person procedures and some cool stuff for patients. And I was looking through their website, and right now there's not a privacy policy on it. There's no there's nothing in regard to any sort of privacy protection. And at the moment, that's a live URL. It's out there. So, luckily nobody knows about it at the moment. But and then the next day I was working on a rebrand for a practice, and I mentioned, we were talking about things we were going to do on the website to get it launched here in a couple of weeks. And I said, oh, by the way, you may want to revisit your privacy policy or notice of privacy practices. And they were like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And what like what we have to do with the name change and all these other things. And so it's just kind of like, it's an afterthought, because it's just those documents that one time, legal review 10 years ago that are probably out of date, or you don't have them at all listed on the website. And it's things like that where you're kind of setting yourself up to potentially have an issue.
Yeah. And from a marketing perspective, I don't think the question is no longer, can we track this data? Instead, now the question has become, okay, what can we track? Where can we track it? And under what legal entity are we tracking it for? Like, you really just we have to be intentional in what we're tracking and why we're tracking it and how we're using that data. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about like just the basics here of, what's the baseline that we're looking at that's setting the tone for this whole conversation.
Yeah. So HHS first kind of issued this formal tracking technology guidance. I believe it was in 2022. They updated it again in 2024 along with OCR. And it just underscores that there's a new kind of standing compliance priority. And basically what that says is that pixels, cookies, analytics, they can involve PHI if they either link to an individual, and that also relates to, health or care or payment. And that actually applies on unauthenticated pages. So your conditions, symptoms, provider, finder pages, any of that stuff. And it can also relate to just if a person visits the website. So even if they're not giving you technically like any sort of information, they're not filling anything out. But if they go to the site, let's say, and they click on a condition page and you're using Google Analytics on your website, well, just the fact that, so what Google Analytics will do is they will take that person's, they call it like a click ID, and they can basically say, this click ID came from this place. And technically that's PHI under this.
And if you're listening to this and you have a website, there's 90% chance you're using Google Analytics, because if you're getting reports from your agency or internal or you name it, that means that you are tracking this data. And so one of the things that we're working on in 2026 is stripping all of the potential PHI, now that there's like this ruling out there, or this like opinion of stripping all of this, like making everything anonymous. So we can strip out anything potentially that's PHI related. But if you're using Google Analytics on your website, you need to start paying attention to this.
Right. And technically, even if you strip out that info, and
It's still there.
Google Analytics, right? It's still a violation, because in one of these recent guidances that was set up, it basically says that they need to have a BAA, and Google will not sign BAAs. So
yeah.
Technically, if you're using Google Analytics, it's a HIPAA violation.
Yep. And so kind of the takeaway there is it's just analytics. Like, I'm just tracking data. That's no longer defensible. Instead now, like, cookie banners if you have like a cookie banner up on your website that says we use cookies for this, that is no longer authorization to release like PHI. It's no longer HIPAA compliance. And so these are the things we're like trying to be really proactive with as we go into 2026, in part because it's always been a gray area, and this cottage industry is popping up, and the conversation is being elevated, and we know that if you're not paying attention to it, you're going to get swept into that conversation, and you don't want to be part of it.
Right. And so, yeah, basically just kind of like circling back to, what that, some recent court rulings have kind of decided. And again, a lot of this is up to the particular court in the case that you're in and what have you. But in June of 2024, there was a court decision that kind of, that said that essentially an IP address plus a visit to a public health page is PHI, or could potentially be PHI. And so there's a couple things that did and that did not do. So that did not say that HIPAA is changing, or the OCR guidance is really going to be impacted one way or the other. But enforcement, really, it depends on a couple of different things. And again, this can all be argued. So this is where it kind of gets into the gray area. But if it's a logged in user, if they're a current patient, if they filled out a form, if they're on a portal, what the URL actually is, so for example, if you have on your website, you have whatever.com/knee-replacement. I visit that page. You're using Google Analytics. If you go by the letter of the law, I didn't sign up to have anything shared, but if that information, is shared with Google, that's a violation.
So when I heard this, Corey, I remember we've had quite a few conversations internally. How do you prove, and I know you have an answer to this, so I'm going to ask it for the listener. How do you, I'm going to say, look, I could have looked up my shoulder pain on Google and also been like asking Alexa or whatever. And then I came to the website. And how are you going to say that me coming to your website, that I didn't already have like this cookie attached and that's how I got like retargeted? How are you going to tell me that it's because I came to the website?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the answer that I think attorneys would want me to give is that's up for the courts to decide.
Okay.
But you can, but basically,
there's a unique identifier on the back of the website.
Right. That's what I was going to say is really when you look at analytics, it does create a unique identifier. And if those things are not checked to be made anonymous, then it creates a click ID, which works itself into basically a profile for you. That's how so there's a thing called remarketing or retargeting, which most people stay away from in healthcare. The platforms really won't even let you do it, but you've probably seen it if you're looking at a watch or a pair of shoes or something, and then you go somewhere else and you see it. That's kind of retargeting. But Google makes a boatload of money off of advertising. So what they do is, because someone somewhere opted in to the analytics policy, most likely without reading the full thing. But what it says is that we're going to collect this information from your users, and then we may use that at some point to create essentially like a profile, and then give them ads related to said profile. So if I go to a website and I look at a knee replacement, and then I'm also looking at knee braces and Dr. Scholl's inserts or whatever, when I visit other websites or do other things, or I'm on YouTube later or whatever, I may see ads related to that. And all of that kind of comes from this profile that's created, and your website helped create that profile without my consent is the problem.
And I think you just explained it in a way that every single person is going to understand. And so you take it to that next level. I think the real accelerant is the fact that there's no nationwide policy. And so what's happening, which we always see, is that each of the states are determining on their own what this means in their state. So right now, and we're recording this into December 2025. It'll release in 2026 early. But right now, at this moment, there's at least 4 states have health-specific consumer data laws. And there's 20 states that have general privacy laws that treat health data as sensitive. And so oftentimes these laws apply outside of HIPAA. So this is in addition to HIPAA, it's the privacy stuff. They apply to marketing websites, and they apply to non-patients and your prospects. And so what this means to all of us in healthcare is that even if something isn't PHI under HIPAA, it may be PHI under state law. And that's changing as the states are adopting different policies and laws. And we know, the law structure and the makeup comes from the average citizen who may or may not know what they're talking about. So what we're about to have, and what we kind of have now, is this web of different rules based on where you are geographically. And then at the same time, there's likely some there's some nationwide laws coming through. And we're seeing it. So I'm in the state of Florida, Corey's in Michigan, but in the state of Florida, we're seeing it right now related to AI. Our governor is trying to put some laws on the books related to AI. And the president said, no, we're going to do something nationwide. We're not going to do state by state. This thing, it's already happening. And so the states are all developing their own individual laws, which is what typically has to happen in order to get a national law passed. And as a practice or as a marketer, I got to figure out each one of these, and I got to make sure it's going to be a little bit different. The rules are in each state that I'm in. And what it really is boiling down to is that one issue that you just mentioned, Corey. Basically Google's not signing a BAA. Analytics are what we're using to track our websites. Google's not signing a BAA. And in fact, they're taking that little, unique identifier and giving it to other people, and other people are advertising to you. And it's coming from your website, doctor. And so now we got to fix this. And, it is the wild, wild west. And Europe figured it out. They just passed, an entire policy across the EU. California said, well, let us be as strict as Europe, because there's some pretty strict laws in Europe. So California's got different privacy policy and HIPAA laws than anybody else. And that's what we're up against right now.
Yeah, and fun fact, so PHI is what we talk about in healthcare. But this same thing is like you were just saying, it's everywhere. The privacy in general with PII, which is personally identifiable information, which is the exact same thing. So there's the offshoot of this, just for every industry, is that the same thing applies. If I go and look at a Toyota, I didn't necessarily give consent for them to then remarket me for Camrys when I'm on Instagram later. So, even and the argument is made, like, maybe you click the cookies button or whatever, and again, that's where a lot of the nuance and the merit law and all that kind of applies and the argument happens. But it's being stood up just like the healthcare stuff. So.
Yeah. And it's kind of like the opt-in, opt-out conversation that we used to have. Well, we'll just make people opt out of our marketing material. No, we got to make them opt in. Like, you'll make them opt in twice, type of thing. So I mean, it's evolving, and we just have to pay attention to it. So I think I want to touch on the states that currently have laws on the books. So there's 4 that I mentioned. These laws explicitly target consumer health data, including health-related web activity. So we have Washington State, Nevada, Connecticut, and Maryland as of right now. So in Washington, it's called the My Health, My Data Act. It provides a broad definition of consumer health data, opt-in consent for collection and sharing, super strict limits on geofencing, and a private right of action. Those are kind of the very broad. If you're in Washington with your practice, this is what you should be paying attention to. Let's just make sure, letter of the law, that you're paying. These are states that have proactively already moved forward. So we want to make sure that if you're in this state, that you are really paying attention to the privacy stuff. Nevada, they have something called the Consumer Health Data Privacy Law now. It's modeled on the Washington law. This often happens, by the way. The Northwest are really early adopters when it comes to regulations. Oregon, interesting that it's not on this list, because Oregon typically leads the country in some of these restrictive policies. Oregon and even California, but it typically happens out west. So in Nevada, theirs is focused on consent and contract requirements. So pay attention to that if your practice is in Nevada. Connecticut has the health data amendments, which basically is health interfering and web data outside of HIPAA. So I'm not 100% what that means, but basically if you're in Connecticut, you should be paying a little bit more attention. And then in Maryland, last year, or in 2024, they passed the health data law, which extends protections to non-HIPAA related health data. So just a lot to be paying attention to. And like I said, there's 20 other states that are putting different laws on the books, and each one is a little more nuanced.
Right. And like we said, it can apply to condition pages, appointment interest, any sort of a quiz or a form, or basically your entire website.
Yeah, basically your entire website. And for the states that have these laws, it basically is telling you the default pixel strategies are just non-compliant. You gotta you either gotta have a total HIPAA compliant reporting data, tracking software, or you just need to stop tracking it.
Right. Or yeah, exactly. You need to have you
gotta pay. You gotta either pay for better data, for private data, or you just need to turn it off.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, and then like you said, there's all these other states that have, that have classified health data as sensitive, and so that can require anything from specific opt-in or heightened controls. I was on a hospital site the other day, and normally you just get the accept button, and it's this little thing at the bottom, and it was this whole big box that came up, and I had the option to. There was, I don't know, 4 or 5 different toggles, and I could accept, reject, or accept some of them. It was a whole thing. It was honestly too much to look at, but that's an example of what the heightened controls kind of looks like. And
to your point, though, I think though, even if you have that, it's not compliant, because what they're saying is just because you click yes or no, I mean, the thought process is nobody's reading that, which we know they're not, and you're just clicking yes or no. It doesn't mean that you have the authority to then track me.
Well, it's like when you go to the practice, right? You have to release your information, and you have to physically sign something. We're all used to that. That is compliant. So if I'm not signing something, then I'm not in compliance. And
it's not just your website and Google Analytics. Your chances are your website has plugins to make it work properly. Those plugins are also potentially collecting data. You got to turn that off or not use the plugins. even if you have the policy where you're checking, yes, I'll accept this, no, I won't accept this, it may be breaking. When they check no, it may end up breaking the website because it turns those plugins off. It's the apps that are tied to it. It could be your chat bot. It could be, I mean, there's just so many things. It's not just your website and Google Analytics. It's all the other things that like make your website work.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said, there are ways around that, absolutely. And we'll kind of talk about some best practices in the next episode and some things that you can do. But the thing to know is that it's tougher and tougher to say that you're HIPAA compliant and your privacy is buttoned up here, especially if you're a multi-state provider.
Yeah, because if you're a multi-state provider, you've got to figure this out because like we said, it's different from state to state.
Right. Yeah. And so that means you may need to know, like, if you're multi-state, like where patients are coming from and which state rule kind of applies, or if there's a way to kind of blanket and be covered from all of them. And then the part that we haven't talked about yet is one way to be covered, like you said, is just turn them all off. But then you have no real like data intelligence to say, how do we make good decisions, or how do we know if something is working? And so it really becomes about finding the right solution that will protect you, but also give you some of the information that you want, like how many visitors you have, how long they're on the website, and what they're doing when they're there. Did your ads convert? That's a big one. You want to make sure that the things that you're paying a large portion of your budget for potentially are actually driving people to the practice.
Yeah, and I think, from a practicality standpoint, especially if you're multi-state, at least 4 states treat health-related tracking as a standalone regulatory category. You got to pay attention to that. And another 15 or so states impose sensitive data rules that affect these ads and pixels. So if you're running ads, if you have a website, if you're tracking anything, if you're paying attention to any data, you got to pay attention to what's going on here.
Right. And so just some kind of things to know here. Some of the things you can do that make sense is auditing your pixels on the website. So your tag manager, whatever pixels you have on the website that you're tracking. Also looking at portals, appointment forms, condition pages, and then so I would say first kind of get a list of those things, so you've got a good jumping off point, and then moving forward you can talk about finding a analytics provider that's not Google, or serving those up on server side so they aren't actually like sent anywhere, and then taking the right measures to de-identify or anonymize whatever the data is, so you can still see, for example, who came to the website, as in a number, like 1 person came, 2 person, 3, like that, but you don't actually get any information about where they're coming from and any sort of click ID.
And we're not doing anything with that information anyway. You don't need it. So,
right.
9
times out of 10,
Google's like a Ferrari, and all we need is an electric bike. We don't need anything fancy. So I think, the second episode of this, we're going to tell you what we think you should be doing. It's what we're doing across the board, because it is still somewhat of a gray area, but it's top of mind for all of us right now.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So let's talk about privacy first MarTech things, because this is the thing that gets me. Like, as an entrepreneur, I love when there's a problem that you can solve with a new business. But there's these cottage industries. So you're going to get hit now, because this thing is got legs and the conversation is starting around it. So there's going to be a ton of new vendors that can solve your problem.
Yeah, all of a sudden there's compliance automation tools and HIPAA-friendly analytics and pixel replacements and plugins that are HIPAA compliant, all these other things.
Money, money, money.
Yeah, none of those are free. And so the opportunity here is to measure performance without this sort of, big tech ad tracking solution, which is Google. Yeah, I mean, that's what most people use. Now, of course, there's a risk for that because as these things pop up, some of them are going to fail. So, you could invest in a technology that's going to close up shop or get bought or whatever. There's also a risk of having compliance as a checkbox, which isn't technically compliant. There's the risk of having too many tools, just too much sprawl with keeping track of too many things. Also, claiming that you're certified when you're really not is a way to really, put your foot in your mouth. So I think if you're looking at this from a marketer standpoint, the strategy should be fewer tools, but better governance of those tools. And then, you're going to have to bring different stakeholders to the table. You're going to have to align with legal, IT, marketing. Ops is going to need to be in that discussion as well. And might as well bring HR into it. So there's a lot to unpack.
It's just a new level of things to deal with. Just a new level of things to deal with. And if you're like most doctors out there, you want data because the data helps you make informed decisions. So we just have to think about what data is really important and how we're going to track that data and what tools we're going to use to get it. And don't get lured in by every new company opening up and saying, here, doctors, spend a bunch of money. Figure out what it is you actually need, do the things you can do. And then, if you do the things you can do on your own or with the help of, whoever it is on your team, and then you'll figure out if you need to actually spend money on something that you may or may not even need. So let's wrap it up here. Strategic takeaways related to this. And we're kind of like toning it down a little because this is something we've been talking about a lot. It's probably one of the number one things that we are focused on, just making sure that our ducks are in a row and our clients' ducks are in a row, especially because there's so many different rules out there from state to state. But it's just something to be paying attention to. So what are some of the big takeaways here, Cord?
Yeah. I think the big takeaway is that marketing around healthcare is moving from sort of quote unquote surveillance based to more of a, first party strategy. In other words, like you're keeping the data, or at least you're making sure that it's stripped of anything that can identify people. And those that do that early, you're going to have a competitive advantage because you can use these ethical data practices. You can really communicate transparency, which I think is a big plus here. Plus, you're going to have the peace of mind, that it's done and you've done everything reasonable kind of within your power to make sure that this is not going to be a problem. And you can turn this compliance into trust and differentiation, and then ultimately long-term growth if you do it right, because you're going to be able, again, to position yourself as ethical in this sense, for sure.
Yeah. And I think as we've been talking a lot about, what's this big theme for this year, it kind of goes back to more and more it's trust. We're in a world where trust is truly a commodity, and it's very hard to, it's easy to lose and very hard to gain, to earn. And this is just another way that we can earn it. So, we've got episodes that we've been talking about where we talked about just consumer experience and these trust expectations. And, this is one of those things. We're expecting that you're not going to sell my data. And I'm expecting that you are protecting me as your patient. You're protecting me from Google or whoever else getting my data and using it, so somebody can make a buck on me. Like it's about privacy. And we also talked about trust as it relates to social and just public accountability. As a practice and a healthcare provider, you're held to a higher standard. And if you don't meet that standard, people have no problem like either throwing you under the bus on social and talking about you, even if you're not in the room, or, letting you become part of these class action lawsuits that are out there. And there's quite a few of them at this moment.
Yeah. And so to me, that says that the actual measurement of your marketing, it's now a brand decision. And that, it's not that this is going to kill marketing or kill reporting or whatever. It just reshapes it. It just changes.
Yep.
some of the information that you're able to get. But like you said a few minutes ago, the stuff that you get now, most of it, you're not
You're
really
not even
using the
using
data anyway.
No.
You want to see how many people to go to the website, and then like what's working and what's not working. But you don't actually need any of the additional information about who they are or where they are. You just need to know if what you're doing from a marketing standpoint is working.
That's
And
it.
you can still do that.
Yep. All right. So hopefully you stick around and catch the next episode too, because we're going to talk about some specific things that you can do to protect your practice related to privacy. And with that, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Corey.
We'll see you next time on the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. Thanks a bunch.
Bye, guys.
If you want more like this, hit like and subscribe so you'll always be alerted to new episodes when they come out. And if you want information about us, visit us over at insightmg.com. That's insightmg.com. We'll see you on the next episode.